What I want to talk to you about today is mostly about those bigger decisions, the ones that we agonize over and that need no small amount of thought space, and the answer just isn't coming easy. These are the bigger decisions that might have major impact on our kids and our family. The kinds of decisions where we want to say yes and can see the good in that yes, and we want to say no because, well, that seems good too, and we just aren't sure what to do. Do you ever wonder, how am I going to make it through to bedtime? How will I make it to the weekend? Or how will I ever get through this long, hard season with my kids? If you're a mom, you've likely asked those questions over and over again. Hi, I'm Sarah Short. I'm a busy mom of 5 kids, and after almost 2 decades of parenting and asking myself those same questions, I'm here to share with you some of the best ways to navigate through your days as a mom. From life with a newborn, to toddlers, to teenagers, and everything in between, I'll teach you how to walk through every season of motherhood with courage and creativity and come out on the other side smarter and wiser, all while creating great relationships with your kids and a home life you love. My Nana once told me, there's no way but through. Turns out she was right, in life and in motherhood. So throw your hair in a messy bun, grab your coffee, and come have a seat as we talk about all things mom. This is the No Way But Through podcast. Welcome back to the No Way But Through podcast. I missed being here last week, but it was so good to take a week off and spend some time with my family. My littlest kids had a week off from school, and it was just a really sweet time of hanging out with them. And my husband and I took them to the NC State Fair, and we just had some really sweet time with them and with my family. If there's anything that I would ever want to encourage you to do on this podcast, it's that anytime you can, to choose your family. Sometimes we have to work and there isn't anything we can do about it, but there are times when we can choose. And I will tell you that there pretty much isn't anything in my life that can stack up against time with my family. I choose them over and over and over again over other things because they really are my very best people and my very best work. And I love choosing them anytime I can. If you haven't yet, please come on over to Instagram and join us there. I post podcast-related content over there during the week, and I throw up a question box every Monday where you can ask questions on pretty much anything you want, and then I answer a bunch of them up in stories over there. I love engaging with you all, so if you haven't had a chance to come over yet to No Way But Through on Instagram, I would love for you to do that. And lastly, before we get started today, I just want to thank you so much for the reviews you've left me over on Apple Podcasts. If you have been loving this podcast, I would love it if you would go over there and leave me a review. That just helps so much for other people to be able to find this podcast and learn from it and be blessed by it, and for me to continue doing what I'm doing. And it would just mean so much to me if you'd go over there and leave a review. So one of the things that I really wanted to do in these early weeks of the podcast is to talk to you about very foundational things. Like, what are the foundational things I believe about motherhood? What are the things that I've learned about us as a family, but even more so about family life in general, as I've watched and learned from other families and spent the last 2 decades entrenched in mom life? There is so much of motherhood where you're learning in really acute and specific situations on how to handle things. And because every family is different, and every kid is different, there are situations and challenges and struggles that you're going to encounter that are going to be very specific to your kids. There are a lot of things that are just situational. I could fill up a year's worth of podcasts talking to you about different situations I've been in with my kids and how I've handled each of those situations. And some of you would relate to them and some of you wouldn't, because your kids might never deal with those things, or you may never be in that situation as a mom. Or maybe you wouldn't handle things the same way I did in very specific situations because you and I are really different. And like I talked about in episode 2 of this podcast, every mother and every child is different. And one of the best things that we can do is recognize that and give our friends and our sisters and family and other moms in our lives the ability and the freedom to just make decisions that are right for their kids and their family, right? It's also what I talked about in episode 3 in how to be a good friend. We let our friends make decisions that are right for them. That's part of what it means to be a good friend. That's definitely part of what it means to be a good mom friend. But what I'm going to talk to you about today is one of those foundational things. This is something that you can apply to almost every situation you find yourself in with your kids. We're going to talk about making decisions. As a mom, you will make thousands and even tens of thousands of decisions about and for your kids. You are making decisions about and for them before they are even born. When do we want to try to have kids? How do we go about it if we're struggling with infertility? How are we going to decorate the nursery? What am I going to eat or not eat or drink or not drink while I'm pregnant? What doctor do I go to? Are we going to pursue adoption? How many kids do we want? Those are all questions you're asking and decisions you're making before a little one even arrives into your life. And once they're here, you will be making decisions for and about and with them every single day. One of the things I think we don't talk about enough is the mental load that moms carry every day. We are the world's ultimate decision makers, right? Sometimes I will say to my husband, you choose because I cannot make one more decision today. I've seen a few reels on Instagram about this recently, and I'm so glad to see that because moms mentally carry so much every day. We toss and turn at night about decisions that we've made and wondering if we did the right thing. And then we toss and turn again about decisions that we need to make. Small ones like our grocery list for the week or what we're going to make for dinner, and bigger ones like, where am I going to send them to preschool, or should I let them sleep over at so-and-so's house? What I want to talk to you about today is mostly about those bigger decisions, the ones that we agonize over and that need no small amount of thought space, and the answer just isn't coming easy. These are the bigger decisions that might have major impact on our kids and our family. The kinds of decisions where we want to say yes and can see the good in that yes, and we want to say no because, well, that seems good too, and we just aren't sure what to do. Very early on in our parenting years, before we even had all 5 of our children, Jason and I began to use a question, a metric of sorts, anytime we were faced with one of those bigger parenting decisions. And almost 20 years later, we still use this question anytime we're making a decision about our kids. This question is a starting point for us. It has helped guide us, helped redirect us when we were flailing, helped shape our kids and shape us as a family. And it's given us clarity and peace so often. It has been so invaluable to us as parents and so foundational in how we operate over here. So what is it? What is the question we ask anytime we're faced with a parenting decision and we aren't quite sure what to do? Here it is. We ask ourselves this: are we making this decision out of wisdom or out of fear? Wisdom or fear? I can't even tell you what just the asking of this question does in us as we're processing a decision. Sometimes we are able to immediately determine that we are saying no to something simply because it's wise. And the opposite is also true. Sometimes we can immediately identify that we are saying yes or no out of fear. But most of the time, especially when a bigger decision about our kids is involved, we have a discussion around this question and we kind of go back and forth. Sometimes I'll cry because I know that I am afraid. And as a mom, I want to protect my kids. And protecting them sometimes means holding on. But choosing what's right for them oftentimes means letting go. And that is really, really hard on a mom's heart. Let me give you a few examples as to how this has played out in our family and for us as parents. I think that will help illustrate how this has worked over here and also help you think about some of the decisions you're making now as young moms or that you'll have to make and how you might be able to process them by asking yourself this question. When my oldest Jack was 4, most of my new friends out in Michigan, where we were living at the time, were sending their kids to preschool. I didn't really want to send him to preschool for a whole host of reasons. One, I had a newborn and we lived in snow and ice, and Jason was working hard going into the office early every day, and I knew I'd be responsible for the drop-off and pickup. And I just wasn't sure how that would work with another toddler and a newborn and needing to get Jack every day from preschool. I also really just loved my boys playing together all day. Jack and Max were inseparable, and I loved our days at home with them playing together, and I knew they both loved it too, and I didn't want to take Max's best friend away. I determined that I really felt like it was best for all of us not to send him to preschool, and Jason agreed. At that point, we didn't have this wisdom versus fear question yet, so I made the decision to not send him, and I wasn't sure if I felt good about it or not. I just made the decision. Late in the summer, I was hanging out with friends, and they were all talking about what preschools their kids were going to, and I began to feel this all too common feeling to moms. I began to feel less than. I felt like maybe I'd made the wrong decision. Was I supposed to be sending him to preschool, or were my reasons not valid? And I really didn't know how to process it. So I came home and abruptly made the decision that I would homeschool him for preschool. In fact, I decided that I would preschool homeschool both of my rowdy boys while also having a newborn. I ran out and bought a whole bunch of supplies, and I ordered stuff online and spent a bunch of money that I didn't have on curriculum and construction paper and colored pencils and scissors that I was hoping they wouldn't stab each other with. And I set up this little room in the basement of my house, and I homeschooled them for exactly 2 weeks before I threw in the towel. I was so not in a place to be doing that, and I had no idea what I was doing, and I absolutely did not want to be a homeschool preschool teacher to my maniac boys. But I did all of that and spent all of that money and put all of that stress on myself because I was afraid. I was afraid of what my friends would think. I was afraid of being confronted with, where are they going to preschool? And me saying, they don't go. They just stay home and play. I was afraid that people would think I was lazy or that I didn't care about Jack like I should. Homeschooling? I could say he was going to preschool and that I was his teacher. See, I'm a good mom. I made that decision to homeschool him for preschool out of fear. That's it. I was afraid of all of those things I just mentioned and more that I didn't. There was no wisdom in it. It was fear. Let me give you another recent example. When Jack was about 6 years old, he began to ask us to play football. It was about that time that there was news about CTE. It was in the news a bunch, and about football injuries. My 3 brothers had never played football, and no one in Jason's family had ever played football either. And it just wasn't something we were familiar with. And even though we were big NFL Ravens fans, like the biggest, we never considered that our kids would want to actually play football. And so much of that world was unknown to us. So we just kept putting him off and saying no year after year. I also wondered what people would think of me if we let him play football and he got hurt. When 7th grade rolled around for him and he could try out for the football team at his middle school, we allowed him to go to the workouts in the summer, to the football workouts. But when it came time to try out for the team a few weeks later, we said no. We were afraid. We were afraid he'd get injured or hurt. We were afraid of the unknown. We were afraid of what might go on in the locker room and the talk in there. So we said no. Later that fall, I was sitting at a birthday party next to a mom whose son played on that middle school team. She asked me, "Hey, are you going to let Jack play football next year?" I wiggled in my seat and I told her my concerns about being afraid Jack might get hurt and the locker room and all of that. And she so kindly shared with me how much she loved the coach of the football team. He was a Christian, and we're Christians too. So he shared our belief system, and she told me that he'd created an environment on the team that she really loved for her son. I left that party and relayed that conversation to Jason, and we then asked ourselves the question that we had asked in so many other situations over the years, but for some reason had never really applied to our son's request to play football. Are we saying no to football out of wisdom or out of fear? I will tell you that it didn't take us long. It didn't take us long at all to determine that we had indeed been making that decision out of fear. We knew that's what was behind our no. It was fear. And while it was too late for 7th grade, after we sat with our wisdom versus fear question and came to the conclusion that fear was leading our decision, we decided we would let him try out in 8th grade. The irony, looking back, is that we decided we'd let him play in 8th grade because we knew there was no way he'd make his high school football team having only played 1 year of football. And that kid, like kids often do, proved us wrong and made the football team in 9th grade and just finished 4 amazing seasons as part of his state championship contending high school football team. Did he get injured? Yes, he broke his hand twice. Did we survive that? Yes. And being on the sideline and cheering for his teammates when he wanted to be out on the field when he was injured taught him an invaluable lesson in cheering for others when they're doing something you wish you could be doing. I could write a whole book on the things my sons have learned playing football. The memories we've made and the lessons they've learned and the people we've met and all the ways that being part of football teams have shaped them. And now I have 3 sons that play football. And I look back on the wrestling that we did with wisdom and fear and finally making the decision to allow Jack to play. And I am so grateful that we worked through it and were able to clearly identify that we were making that decision not out of wisdom, but out of fear. I wanted to share both of these stories with you because both of these stories illustrate how I allowed fear to be the driving force behind my decisions, not wisdom. They were failures in a way. I can recognize that now. But one of the things I love so much about motherhood, and that I've shared with you here before, is that we learn from our mistakes. We learn by looking back and saying, I didn't do that well. So how can I do it better moving forward? How can I learn from this and become a better mom because of what I've just walked through? Let me now share with you a couple of scenarios where we asked ourselves this question and did this really well. And we now look back on these and see why we love this question and why we continue to use it in our decision making for our kids today. One of the decisions we had to make as parents, and you likely will have to make as well if you haven't made it already, is whether or not to allow your younger kids to do sleepovers. I am not here today to tell you if you should or shouldn't let your kids do sleepovers. There are so many variables that go into that, and so many families that I love and respect do this differently than we do, and I would never sit here and tell you whether or not you should or shouldn't do this. What I want you to see in the story that I'm going to tell you, is how we processed it in using that wisdom versus fear question. When our kids were really little, they regularly got invited to birthday party sleepovers with friends, that kind of thing. It just was not something we felt comfortable with. But we really wanted to sit down and talk it out and get at the heart of why we were making the decision we were making. I remember when we sat down and asked this question I'm talking about today. Are we making this decision out of wisdom or out of fear? Because we had moved around the country multiple times, we really didn't have established relationships with friends once our kids got to the age where they were getting invited to sleepovers. We lived several years in Baltimore, then 5 years in the Midwest, and then we moved to Raleigh. And because we didn't have close, long-held friendships, a sleepover with people we didn't know well, it just wasn't something we were comfortable with. As we sat there and talked, we determined that because we didn't have that longevity in relationship where we had built trust and understanding with other families, we could identify that that was the wisdom behind our decision. Our kids could spend the night with cousins or with their grandparents, but birthday party sleepovers were something we were going to say no to. It's been many years, and with very, very few exceptions, our younger kids haven't done sleepovers. I look back on it, and it was the right decision for us. We weren't afraid, but we weren't going to say yes to sleepovers because of peer pressure or because we didn't want to seem weird or disappoint our new friends or our kids or theirs. We were making the decision out of wisdom. And that conversation, answering that question, is what enabled us to be able to identify the why and to feel good about it. Once our kids hit their older teenage years, we allow them to stay the night with friends now after they've gone to the movies or played poker or whatever it is they do, and we feel good about that too. But I share this story with you not because of what decision we made, but because of the question that we asked. And it was in the asking of that good question, are we making this decision out of wisdom or out of fear, that we were able to confidently make the right decision for our kids. That sleepover scenario is something we processed when our kids were really little. Here's another more recent scenario to show you that we still are asking the same question because it continues to apply to our parenting. I know most of you listening are younger moms and aren't quite yet dealing with cell phones and texting and all of that yet. But I think you'll really be able to grasp the concept here from the scenario that I'm about to describe to you, and be able to see how we were asking this question when our kids were really little and that we're still asking it now. When Jack was in 8th grade, we gave him a cell phone. Before we ever gave him the phone, we spent a tremendous amount of time thinking about the parameters and guidelines that we wanted to give him when he got his phone. I actually don't love rules, as I think I've mentioned before, but kids need guidelines as it relates to technology, even from a very, very young age. And Jason and I spent a lot of time thinking through how we wanted to present Jack's phone to him, what we wanted to teach him about it, what we wanted him to know about how to use it for good in his life and in his relationships, and also to warn him about some dangers and temptations of having a phone. And we wanted to just be really intentional about how we gave it to him and how we talked to him about it right out of the gate. We actually wrote up a whole contract that laid it all out, which in the spirit of transparency, I want to tell you we still don't use today, but that's for another time. But today, we still have a very intentional and ongoing conversation about phones with our kids. We walked him through it, and there were things in there like, you need to plug in your phone downstairs at 9 p.m. You can't take your phone upstairs. We talked to him about how technology and cell phones can be used for so much good. We told him things like, use your phone for good to text and encourage the people you love in your life. Take photos of the things around you so that you can capture memories you want to look back on. We spent a lot of time reading and talking to older parents that had gone before us, and we had been seeking out a lot of wisdom from others before we ever gave Jack a phone. One of the guidelines that we had for him was that he was not allowed to text girls one-on-one when he first got his phone. We made that decision with a lot of wisdom from others who had boys, and we wanted Jack to learn how to text with girls inside the context of group chats where there was some accountability in what was being texted back and forth. He could text his guy friends one-on-one. He could absolutely text girls within a group text scenario, all of them together, with girls and guys on the same text. But that as he was learning to communicate and learning to use his phone, we really didn't want him getting into one-on-one conversations with girls. He did really, really well with this. And in those early days when he had his phone, he was really respectful and honored that guideline. And even then, he seemed to understand the wisdom behind it, even if he didn't like it so much. Not long after Jack got his phone, we got a text message from the dad of one of the girls Jack was friends with. The dad texted us that he and a couple of other dads in our community of friends had decided that they were no longer going to allow their girls to be on any friend group texts for a number of reasons. One of them being that the volume of texts that were coming through on these group chats was distracting from homework and life and family life, and that it was creating a lot of drama in their girls' lives, and that these families had collectively decided that they were no longer going to allow group texts for their girls, and that all of their text communications needed to be one-on-one. They wanted to let us know because this was going to impact Jack's ability to communicate with their daughter via group text, as well as with the other girls in these families that he was friends with. As I've mentioned before, multiple times on this podcast, we absolutely respect and honor the decisions of other parents. And I will shout from the mountaintop for the rest of my life that there is not one right way to parent something. In fact, we didn't have a teenage daughter. We still don't. We didn't know how to parent a teenage girl, and we respected the decision these parents had made. When Jason and I sat down to discuss this text message, we realized a couple of things. One, we had made a decision that was literally the opposite of this. Our son, our child, was only allowed to group text with girls inside, a group, and was not able to text one-on-one individually with girls at all. We then realized that this meant that Jack would no longer be able to communicate via text with any of those girls that were his friends. These were close friends of his, and we wanted them to develop their friendships and communicate with each other. And we know that as teenagers, texting is part of that. And so Jason and I sat with all of this and talked about it for quite a while. Should we change our decision? We sat with this question. What do we do? Do we join in on this group decision? Or do we stick with what we've already decided for Jack? And once we decide, are we making this decision out of wisdom or out of fear? We came to the conclusion that the decision that we had made a few months before, from seeking counsel and advice from other parents that had gone before us, and out of our deep love for Jack, that we really had made the best decision for him in not allowing him to text one-on-one with girls at that age. So we texted the parents back. We thanked them for letting us know and communicated with them that we absolutely respected their decision, but that it would mean that Jack would not be communicating with their daughter and those friends any longer via text, because we were going to continue to allow only group texts for Jack. I want to tell you that this was easy, but it wasn't. These were some of our very dear and close friends who were making a different parenting decision than we were, and they were making a group decision. This involved 3 families that we were very close with, and the easiest thing might have been to say, "Oh, this is great. We'll hop on board and do this too." But in doing that, we would have been foregoing the wisdom we'd sought after and landed on and been making the decision out of fear. We would have been making the decision because we wanted our friends' approval and fear of what they might think, and that unintentional pressure can feel like a whole lot. But in doing that, we would have been taking away what was best for Jack. They all had daughters. We had a son. A decision that might be right for teenage girls might be a terrible decision for teenage boys. Fear of what our friends might think of us, fear of what our parents might think, fear of what anybody thinks, fear of backlash from others for choosing what we've chosen, those are things that should never determine our choices for our kids. Bringing this back around to you as young moms, if you haven't yet, you will likely end up in scenarios like this too. Friends are going to do things differently than you do them. You are going to make decisions for your kids that you know are the right decisions for them, but you're going to have friends that are going to choose the opposite or do things very differently. When you evaluate your decisions with this question in mind, am I making this decision out of wisdom or out of fear? The very asking of that question will help you process what is best for your kids, and it then frees you to choose what you know is right for them and to really let the decisions and opinions and preferences and choices of other people go. I have to say this here before we go any further. There are people we go to for wisdom. We always have, because we need it. Because we need the wisdom of others in our lives, helping us know how to parent and how to process choices. We need community to parent. We need parents who are in it with us too and understand exactly what we're dealing with. And we can sit around a table and learn so much from each other on different ways of handling things and help one another and be there to support and encourage each other. We have leaned so heavily on parents that have gone before us too and come out on the other side to tell us about it. It is incredibly unwise to parent on an island and think that we have all the answers and can figure everything out ourselves. But there are also people in our life that we love and we are close to that we do not go to for parenting wisdom. Maybe we've seen their choices or watched them parent, and we just aren't on the same page with a lot of things. And that's absolutely okay. But I can't overstate how important this is. You need people in your life that are trusted people that you can go to and process things with and ask for help. You can go to trusted friends and say, hey, we are trying to decide if we're making this decision out of wisdom or fear. Can you help us process this? This is so smart and shows such humility and openness. And every time we have done this, it has been so good for us. And our kids have benefited in extraordinary ways from us reaching out to people for help and guidance. That being said, while parenting on an island is really unwise and just not smart at all, we absolutely don't do group parenting over here. What do I mean by group parenting? Basically, coming together with friends or signing off on or collectively deciding anything about our kids. Kind of like the group texting decision I was talking about before. A friend was telling me recently about, I believe it's the wait till 8th thing that you can sign. It's basically saying you won't give your kid a cell phone until 8th grade. She told me that at her kid's school, all of the families that agree to this, they get put on a list that's accessible to everybody. And so everybody knows who has signed this and who hasn't. This absolutely blows my mind. The decisions that I make about my kids and cell phones and anything else are never going to be up for group discussion or publicly displayed for anybody to see. What if I change my mind? What does 8th grade actually mean? Is 8th grade the day they finish 7th grade or the day they start 8th grade or sometime during the 8th grade year? What if you want to give your kid a cell phone for their birthday right at the end of 7th grade? Are you not allowed to do that then? We have never done this, and we never will. If you group parent, you are handing over to a collective group of people the ability to choose what's best for your kid. While we lean on the advice of friends and love hearing their perspectives and absolutely seek to humbly learn from other parents, Jason and I are the only parents tasked with making these choices for our specific 5 children. And you know what? The most persuasive person at the parenting table is oftentimes not the most right person at the table. Just because another parent is convincing and is able to passionately argue for why they think things should be done a certain way does not make them right. Some of the wisest, smartest, best parents I know are the quiet ones in the corner that hate a microphone but love their kids and are absolutely slaying at parenting. And maybe, most importantly, Jason and I never want to give up our ability at any point on any given day, week, month, or year to make the decision that is best for our kids and to change our minds for any reason at all. I can't tell you how many times we have thought something was good for our kids one week and literally a couple of weeks later realized it just wasn't a good idea. If you agree with a group of people to do something a certain way, or you sign off on something, or you agree as a group to do this or that as parents, then you are handing over to a collective the ability to choose at any moment what's right for your kids. Wisdom is knowing with humility when to listen to others and also to know when not to. Be open to listen. Be humble. Be teachable. Be ready to sift through what you read and hear. But when you hear or read things that you know are just not right for your kids, be willing to hear it and then let it go. That includes this podcast. I want you to take what helps you and let go of what doesn't. I'm encouraging you to do that. You are going to make so many decisions about your kids over the years. And if I've communicated anything to you over these last couple of months on this podcast, it's how much I value and understand that there really isn't one right way to do things. Of all of you listening today, we could all be faced with the same scenario, given the same scenario, the same set of circumstances, and all come to different conclusions about what the right parenting decision is. And as I've told you before, it's one of the things I really love about being a mom and having mom friends is that we're all so different and colorful and our families are different. And I love seeing how different families do things. I love teaching my kids to love their friends and their friends' families who are different than we are, who choose different ways of doing things and schooling and sports and vacations and how they spend their money, and to be able to look at other people and love them as they are. I've learned so much from watching my friends parent. Sometimes we agree on things and other times we don't. And while I want you to be able to use this wisdom versus fear dynamic to help you make your parenting choices, it's so important that we allow our friends to walk in freedom in however they process parenting, without our silent or not so silent judgment, and make the choices that are right for them and their families. There is so much freedom in letting others make their choices and loving them and their kids through all of it. As I close today, I really want to encourage you to think about using this question when you're faced with those not so easy parenting decisions. For young moms, there are so many decisions to make. When can I leave him with grandma at grandma's house overnight so we can get away? When should I stop breastfeeding? Is it wrong that she's still in our bedroom? What preschool should I send her to? Ask yourself, am I making this decision out of wisdom or out of fear? The fear of what if, the fear of unknowns, the fear of what others might think? I want to encourage you, especially in this podcast today, to not make your decisions based on what other people might think of you for it. Here's another way to think about it. Wisdom tells you that you get to choose what is best for your kids. Fear lets other people choose what is best for your kids. Don't be led by the anxiety and the fear and the groupthink or expediency. Stop and pause. Ask the question. I'm not here today to give you answers. Like I mentioned before, so many of the parenting scenarios we find ourselves in don't necessarily have a right answer. What's important here is the question. That's what I want you to take from this podcast. I want you to stop and ask this question when you're about to make a decision for your kids, no matter what it's about. It's in the stopping, the pausing, the asking of the question that will help you root out what's in your own heart as a mom, what's behind your yes and your no as parents, and help you be able to determine if you need to go seek out wisdom from somebody else or you need help making the parenting choice. Or you may find that in the asking of this question, you will find the clarity you need to make the right decision for your kids. Now that my kids are older, we are teaching them to do this too, to ask this same question when they're making choices. They are making so many of their own decisions and choices now, and we get to tell them that this question that we've been asking ourselves for almost their entire lives is the same question we want them to continue asking as they move from their teenage years up into adulthood. That's it for today. Wisdom, not fear. Pause. Ask this question, am I making this decision out of wisdom or out of fear? I know this will serve you and your family so well. You just finished another episode of the No Way But Through podcast. If you want to connect with other like-minded moms, head over to the No Way But Through page on Instagram. And if you'd like to help financially support our work over here at No Way But Through, there's a link at the bottom of the description of this podcast on how you can do just that. And click follow and subscribe so that you will get alerts every time we drop a new episode.